Have you ever stood in a place so famous, so endlessly photographed, that it feels impossible for anything unnatural to happen there? As if the weight of history itself should keep it safe. That's what I believed about the Louvre, a place too documented to hide anything strange, too watched for anything to slip through. But the longer you stay there, the more you realize how easy it is to disappear inside it. I wasn't supposed to be there alone. My entry slot had been scheduled late in the evening, just before closing, and I thought I was being clever choosing that time. Fewer crowds, more space, a chance to actually look at the art instead of being pushed along with everyone else. When I stepped inside, everything felt calm, almost peaceful. The noise of the outside world faded instantly, replaced by soft footsteps and distant murmurs echoing through high ceilings. At first, nothing felt wrong. There were still visitors scattered across the galleries, moving slowly, pausing at paintings, whispering to each other. Guards stood quietly near doorways, barely noticeable. I wandered without a plan, turning into whichever room caught my attention, letting the museum pull me deeper. It felt endless in a comforting way, like there would always be another room waiting. Then, slowly, that feeling changed. The silence grew heavier. The murmurs disappeared one by one until there was nothing left but my own footsteps. I didn't notice the exact moment it happened, which made it worse. It was like the museum had emptied itself without telling me. When I finally checked my phone, I realized closing time had already passed. There had been no announcement, no warning, no one guiding visitors out. Just silence. That's when I saw the paper. It was taped neatly beside an archway leading into a darker gallery, placed exactly where someone would stop before entering. It didn't look official. It didn't belong there. The white sheet was slightly wrinkled, the handwriting careful but tense, like whoever wrote it didn't want to make a mistake. At the top, it said, "Rules for visiting the Louvre alone." The title made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. It felt too specific, like it was written for me. Underneath were 3 rules, written clearly, almost neatly. Don't enter rooms with no visitors. If a painting changes position, leave immediately. If someone watches you from inside a painting, don't return. I stood there longer than I should have. At first, it felt ridiculous. A prank, maybe. Something meant to scare people for fun. But the placement, the tone, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like instructions. I looked up at the room ahead. It was dimmer than the one I stood in, the lighting uneven, almost flickering deeper inside, and there was no one there, not a single person. That shouldn't have mattered, but suddenly it did. Without thinking too much about it, I stepped back instead of forward and chose a different corridor. The next gallery was brighter, filled with large paintings stretching across the walls, and immediately I felt relief, because there were people there. 2 of them stood near the far wall, a man and a woman, both facing a painting. They didn't speak, didn't move much, but their presence alone made the room feel normal again. I walked in slowly, letting that sense of normalcy settle. But after a few seconds, something started to feel off. They were too still. Not quietly observing, not shifting their weight, not leaning closer. Just standing. Perfectly still. Their posture didn't change at all, like they had been placed there rather than having walked in. Then I noticed the painting in front of them. It was slightly crooked, just enough to catch my eye. Everything else in the museum had been perfectly aligned, carefully curated. This stood out. I found myself staring at it, trying to figure out if it had always been that way. That's when the woman moved. Not her body, just her head. It turned slowly, smoothly, until she was looking directly at me. Her face didn't change, but her eyes felt wrong, empty, distant, like they weren't really focused on me at all. A second later, the man did the same. The exact same motion, the same angle, the same expressionless stare. A cold feeling settled into my chest as I remembered the second rule. If a painting changes position, leave immediately. I looked back at the painting. It wasn't crooked anymore. It was perfectly straight. I didn't think. I didn't question it. I just turned and walked out. My steps started slow, controlled, but quickly picked up pace. The sound of my footsteps echoed too loudly in the empty hallway, making the silence feel heavier instead of quieter. I didn't stop until I reached the place where I'd seen the paper. But the wall was empty. There was nothing there. No paper, no tape, no sign that anything had ever been placed there at all. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to make sense of it, telling myself it had to be a trick of memory. Then I heard it, a faint scraping sound behind me, slow, deliberate, like something heavy shifting slightly. I didn't turn immediately. My body resisted it, like some instinct was telling me not to look. But the sound came again, a quiet drag that seemed to come from the room I had just left. Slowly, I turned my head. At first, there was nothing, just the empty doorway. Then, at the edge of it, I saw the corner of a painting frame. It moved, not suddenly, not violently, but slowly, deliberately, as if something inside the wall was adjusting it from the other side. I didn't wait to see it move again. The moment that frame shifted, something in me broke out of denial. Museums don't move, paintings don't adjust themselves, and people don't stand perfectly still only to turn in sync like that. Whatever logic I had been holding on to collapsed all at once, and I felt it physically, like something beneath reality had shifted just slightly out of place. I turned away from the doorway and started walking, not running yet, but fast enough that my footsteps echoed sharply through the corridor. The sound felt wrong, too loud, too alone, like it didn't belong in a place that had felt so controlled just minutes ago. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at the walls too closely, refusing to check if anything else had changed. But the deeper I went, the more the museum stopped feeling like a place meant for people. The lighting changed first. It wasn't obvious at the beginning, just a slight dimming, like some bulbs weren't working properly. Then, entire sections seemed weaker, creating uneven shadows along the walls. The bright, curated feel of the galleries began to fade, replaced by something colder, something that made it harder to focus on any one thing for too long. Then, the layout started to feel wrong. I don't mean unfamiliar in a normal sense. It was worse than that. It felt like I was walking forward but not actually going anywhere new. The same types of paintings repeated, the same long corridors stretched out ahead. The same arrangement of frames appeared again and again, just slightly altered each time, like the museum was copying itself imperfectly. That's when I saw the second paper. It wasn't placed as carefully as the first. One corner was peeling slightly, as if it had been put up in a hurry. I almost missed it, but something about it pulled my attention back. By then, I already knew what it would be before I even read it. I stepped closer. The handwriting was the same. Careful, controlled, but this time there was a slight shake to it, like whoever wrote it hadn't had much time. There was no title this time, just more rules. Do not follow anyone who appears in more than one room. If you hear footsteps matching yours, stop walking immediately. If a painting is missing, do not look for it. I stared at the words longer than I should have. They didn't feel like warnings anymore. They felt like instructions you only understand after something has already gone wrong. I looked up slowly. The corridor ahead stretched long and narrow, lined with paintings on both sides. At the far end, there was a man standing still, facing one of the walls. For a brief moment, relief tried to settle in. Another person, someone normal, but it didn't last. Because I had already seen this before, the stillness, the posture, the exact distance between him and the painting. It was the same. I stopped walking immediately. The rule echoed in my mind. Do not follow anyone who appears in more than one room. I couldn't remember seeing him earlier, not clearly. But something about him felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Not visually. Just a quiet, unsettling certainty that he didn't belong to just this one space. Then he moved. Not like before. Not just his head. He stepped sideways, slowly, carefully, as if he knew I was watching him without needing to turn around. My breath caught in my throat. And then I heard it. Another set of footsteps, perfectly matching the rhythm of mine, except I wasn't moving. The sound continued anyway. Step, 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 soft, measured, exact. Every part of my body went still. If you hear footsteps matching yours, stop walking immediately. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. The footsteps continued for a few seconds more, each one landing in perfect sync with steps I wasn't taking anymore. Then, just as suddenly as they started, they stopped. Silence returned. But it wasn't empty. It felt like something was waiting. Slowly, I turned my head. Behind me, the corridor was empty. But something felt wrong. Not visually, not in a way I could point to. It felt like the space itself had shifted, like the distance between me and the walls had changed slightly without actually moving. I turned back toward the man. He was gone. Not walking away. Not turning a corner. Gone. The painting he had been facing was still there, perfectly aligned, untouched, but something about it felt heavier now, like it held more than it should. I forced myself not to stare at it. The last rule pressed into my mind again. If a painting is missing, do not look for it. At that moment, I didn't fully understand it, but a few steps later, I did. There was a gap on the wall ahead. At first, it looked like a normal space between paintings, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. There was a mounting bracket still attached, a faint rectangular outline on the wall where something had been, a slightly cleaner patch where the paint hadn't aged the same way. A painting had been there, and now it wasn't. I stopped immediately, but it was too late. My eyes had already locked onto the empty space, and that's when I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched, not from the corridor, not from behind me, from somewhere else, somewhere close. I didn't want to turn my head, but my gaze shifted slightly, just enough to catch the reflection in the glass of the painting beside the empty space. And in that reflection, there was a figure, standing exactly where the missing painting should have been, watching me from inside the wall. For a moment, I couldn't move. It wasn't fear in the way people usually describe it. It wasn't a sudden panic or the urge to run. It was something heavier, something that pressed down on me and held me in place, like my body had decided before I could that movement would make things worse. My eyes stayed locked on the reflection, even though every instinct told me to look away. The figure didn't move. It stood exactly where the missing painting should have been, its shape clear in the glass, but impossible to fully understand. It wasn't detailed, not in the way a person should be. It looked more like an absence carved into a human outline, something that didn't belong in the light but was still visible because of it. Slowly, I forced myself to look away, not because I wanted to, but because something in me understood the third rule in a way I hadn't before. If someone watches you from inside a painting, don't return. The rule hadn't said what to do if they weren't inside a painting anymore. I took a step back. The reflection shifted slightly with me, and for a fraction of a second, I saw the figure adjust. Not a full movement, not a step, just a subtle correction, like it was maintaining its position relative to me instead of the wall. That was enough. I turned and walked. This time, I didn't try to stay calm. I didn't try to convince myself of anything. My pace quickened immediately, my footsteps echoing through the corridors in sharp, uneven bursts. The museum no longer felt vast in an impressive way. It felt vast in the worst possible sense, like something designed to trap you by giving you too many directions to choose from. The lighting grew dimmer as I moved, the shadows deeper, the edges of the walls less defined. The paintings became harder to focus on, not because they weren't visible, but because my mind refused to process them fully. Every time I let my gaze linger for even a second, it felt like something inside them shifted slightly, like they were adjusting to being observed. Then I saw the third paper. It was placed at the intersection of two corridors, directly ahead of me, at eye level. Unlike the others, this one was perfectly flat against the wall, as if it had just been placed there. The handwriting was the same, but steadier now, more certain. I slowed down despite myself. It felt like stopping was dangerous, but ignoring it felt worse. I stepped closer and read, "Do not run. If you see the exit, do not trust it. If a painting appears where there was none before, you are being redirected. If you hear your name, do not answer." There was one final line beneath those rules, written slightly darker than the rest, as if the pen had been pressed harder into the paper. You were not supposed to stay this long. A cold wave moved through me as I read it. That line didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a conclusion. I looked up slowly. At the end of the corridor, there was a door, an exit. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of that. It stood slightly open, just enough to reveal darkness beyond it. Not the soft dimness of the museum, but something deeper, something that didn't look like another hallway or another room. Just absence. For a second, hope tried to surface, a way out, a chance to leave, but the rule echoed in my mind immediately. If you see the exit, do not trust it. I didn't move toward it. Instead, I stepped back, and that's when I heard it. My name, soft, close, spoken just behind my right shoulder. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It sounded like someone I knew, someone I trusted, someone who should not have been there. Every instinct told me to turn around, to answer, to react. But I didn't. I stood completely still, my breath shallow, my hands clenched tightly at my sides. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before it, like the entire space was waiting for me to make the wrong choice. Then the voice came again, closer this time, almost right next to my ear, saying my name. I shut my eyes for a second, just to break the connection, just to stop myself from reacting. And when I opened them again, I focused on the wall in front of me instead of the door, instead of the darkness, instead of whatever was standing behind me. That's when I noticed something new. A painting right in front of me. I hadn't seen it before. I was sure of that. It was large, framed in dark wood, placed exactly where the wall had been empty seconds ago. And it wasn't like the others. It wasn't a historical scene or a portrait of someone long gone. It was recent. The colors were sharper, the details clearer, and the subject. It was me, standing in the corridor, facing the wall, exactly as I was now. My stomach dropped as I stared at it. In the painting, the hallway behind me was darker than it should have been, and there, just over my shoulder, something stood, close, watching, not fully visible, but present. I forced myself to look away. If a painting appears where there was none before, you are being redirected. My chest tightened as I realized what that meant. The museum wasn't random. It wasn't shifting aimlessly. It was guiding me. I took a slow step to the side, then another. The painting stayed in my peripheral vision, but I refused to look directly at it again. I moved along the wall instead of toward the exit, choosing a path that felt uncertain rather than one that felt offered. The voice didn't follow. The footsteps didn't return. For a while, there was only silence again. Eventually, after what felt like far longer than it should have taken, I saw something different. Not a door, not a corridor repeating itself, but light. Natural light, faint but real. I moved toward it cautiously, every step deliberate, every instinct still on edge. The space opened up slowly, the walls widening, the ceiling rising, until I found myself near the main entrance, the glass pyramid. It looked normal. People moved outside, faint shapes, distant, unaware. I didn't rush this time. I walked, slowly, carefully. And when I stepped out, the air hit differently, warmer, lighter, real. I didn't stop walking until I was far enough away that the museum no longer filled my entire view. Only then did I turn back. The Louvre stood exactly as it should have, massive, still, unchanged, as if nothing had happened inside. For a long time, I told myself it hadn't, that it couldn't have, that I had gotten lost, disoriented, overwhelmed. But that night when I finally checked my phone again, There was something I couldn't explain. A photo. I don't remember taking it. But it was there, saved in my gallery. It showed a painting. Dark frame, clear details, and in it, I was standing inside the museum, facing forward and looking directly out, like I was the one inside it now. And behind me, something was standing close enough that it didn't need to be fully visible anymore. If this felt real, that's because it was almost real. I'll see you in the next memory.